Greetings, friends, and welcome to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock-flavoured podcast. On this show, we're taking a look at one of the icons of late 60s and 70s fantasy and science fiction artwork, and the imagery that he produced that was so vivid and so unique that to this day his covers fascinate and astound as they shine forth from the shelves of second-hand bookshops across the land. I'm talking, of course, of Bob Haberfield. Bob's art graced the covers of numerous Moorcock books, originally those published by Mayflower Books and the later Grafton and Panther editions. As we've previously mentioned, for such an iconic brand, Mayflower was a publisher that we know precious little about, other than it was originally launched as a British subsidiary of Dell in the 1960s, before being bought up by Granada publishers. For a decade or so, though, Mayflower Books were iconic for photo art covers and, in particular, the extraordinary psychedelic imagery that's lost none of its impact in the last 50 years, and foremost of those artists was the late Bob Haberfield, to the extent that his work is indelibly linked to Moorcock's words, and in my case, like no other before or since. How wonderful then that the custodian of his work, his son Ben, is now working on ways to get that incredible portfolio out into the world again. And Ben joined Dave and I in Derry and Tom's to talk about his dad's work and his ongoing project to celebrate it. So, sit back, get your brain into a zen space, and join us in Derry and Tom's as we talk about the life and the art of Bob Haberfield. Just by preamble, I'll say, well, we're back in Derry and Tom's, virtual Derry and Tom's, and this is tremendously exciting because Dave and I have been talking on a number of occasions, and the last couple of times we've spoken about Moorcock books, the covers have been Bob Haberfield covers. And we've waxed lyrical about our love of Bob Haberfield covers, particularly on the Mayflower books from the 1970s, and we're extraordinarily fortunate to have Bob's son, Ben Haberfield, with us. Ben, welcome and thanks for coming.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
It's a tremendously exciting thing for me because I suppose, Dave, we have to kind of explain to Ben the impact of his dad's covers on the Mayflower books as we've been collecting Michael Moorcock books.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, yeah, for me, I mean, the brilliance of Bob's art is, in contrast to your kind of typical sort of fantasy book cover, which is, kind of more of a traditional depiction of maybe a scene out of the book or an idea of the thing. Bob's art, yes, it does it, but it does it in this very kind of cool, psychedelic, just nebulous sort of way. It doesn't frame it like your typical fantasy art. It kind of goes one step above into this almost like spiritual aspect. It's really, really exciting stuff. Not to mention the colors, techniques of the paintings itself. It's surreal. It's psychedelic. And it's just beautiful to look at. It's so eye-catching.
They're abstract. They're unlike anything else. And when I first started getting given Michael Moorcock books by my granddad, or Pops, as we called him, a lot of the books we were given were the 1970s Mayflower editions, and some of those covers carried on over to the Granada and Panther editions as well. But seeing for the first time the cover, for example, of The Eternal Champion, which I've got the copy here, which was given to me by my granddad, and I'm not going to say for sure that it's a perfect representation of the contents of the book, but my God, it is so unbelievably striking that these books leapt off the shelves when I was a kid, and when I actually started collecting Moorcock books and going down that rabbit hole because there are so many of them, the Mayflower editions are always the ones I seek out. But we had a quick conversation when I asked you to come on, Ben, and you did point out that you're not really a sci-fi or fantasy guy.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I didn't really know a huge amount about these works until probably about 10 years ago was when I actually discovered when I was visiting my dad, and I was just looking in a cupboard in the spare room that I was staying in, and I just found this stack of artworks. Must have been about 100 or so artworks in there, and I was just kind of leafing. They're all on a kind of hardboard, and I was leafing through them, and I was absolutely amazed by them. And funnily enough, that the one you just showed me there was one of the ones that really kind of struck a note for me, because the woman in it is my mum.
Oh,
And,
Wow.
so that was kind of quite close to the top of the pile. So when I saw that, it really kind of piqued my interest, and that's when I kind of really first discovered that my dad even did any of these kind of works, because he never spoke about them. The artwork that he did, that I kind of knew about, that I saw him doing, was very, very different. And so yeah, it's since he's died, I've been obviously kind of reaching out to people in the science fiction world, and trying to see what's the best thing to do about my dad's legacy. And in doing that, I've been reading lots of blogs and got in touch with so many people that have all been saying the same thing to me: what a huge effect my dad's artwork had on them, as mostly childhood memories, because we are going back 50 years now.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's been a real kind of real discovery for me.
Yeah.
Wow.
What a find! What an incredible find! And you're right. It. Sometimes I have to pinch myself and realise actually how far back these go. And having just turned 50, this edition that I've got that Pops gave me, the very edition that he gave me back in the 80s, actually does date back to almost 50 years ago in and of itself as the paperback book. It's from 1976, this one. But wow, what an incredible find, and what a lovely little bit of context as well.
Yeah.
So one of the most fascinating things about discovering any kind of art, and any kind of, whether it's writing, whether it's visual art, is you become attached to the artwork. But in the case of your dad, I know absolutely nothing about him other than the name. So could you tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you should say that, actually, because through my research, I mean, I'm currently putting together a website that's eventually going to house his entire collection that I'm currently kind of cataloguing data and putting into a database and digitizing all the images. So I've been trying to find out what other people know about him, and you're right. I mean, very few people know very little about him. I mean, the basics that most people know is that he came from Australia, and he did these covers, and that's pretty much all anyone knows about him.
Yeah,
but he was actually also a very, very, very talented flamenco guitarist, which is something no one knows about him. So much so that he was actually offered to go on a 2-year world tour with a very well-known flamenco kind of group. There was a group of guitarists and dancers, and he was kind of playing with them in Paris before he came to England, and they offered him to go on this world tour. And my mum was kind of just pregnant with me at the time, so it was a bit difficult for him to kind of commit to going on this 2-year world tour with him, so I had to turn that down. But he was just extremely talented at everything he did. Absolutely everything that he turned his hand to, he mastered really, really quickly. He left school at 13 years old and did an apprenticeship as a mechanic with I think it was one of his uncles or something like that. And he didn't really enjoy that very much. And then he started training as what was he doing? He was like a graphic designer. Sorry, that's what he was doing. And then he started getting lessons or being mentored by Clifton Pugh. I don't know whether you've heard of him, but he's a very well-known Australian artist. And very, very quickly, he kind of surpassed Clifton Pugh. And he was just so good at everything that he did. And one of the problems that he had was that he couldn't really decide what it was that he wanted to do. And that caused a really kind of massive conflict for him. But, he then married my mum. He'd been doing some kind of solo exhibitions that got kind of really really good reviews, and everyone was kind of expecting him to be this next big Australian artist. And then he left Australia, went to Paris. That's when he started doing record covers for records.
Yeah.
And then he moved to England because my mum wanted for me to be born in England, and that's when he then started doing the Mayflower covers.
Wow. So shit, Dave. There's some records we've got to track down now.
I know. Wow.
There's a book out called Another World Record, and it's a company called World Record Company or something like that, I think it's called. And he did loads of record covers for them. And then there was another company that he was working with in Paris, and he was doing covers for classical records. In fact, actually, the first two science fiction covers that he did, I think it was Firefox, and there was another one that he did. And the two images that he did on that are very, very similar to the paintings that he was doing, the kind of the abstract paintings he was doing in Australia. And then after those two, then the next ones he did, I think, was Stormbringer, the ones that were kind of more photo montage.
Yeah.
Much more like the stuff that he was doing for record covers in Paris. And then he met the Buddhists, who at the time he was really conflicted, because he didn't know what he wanted to do. He didn't know whether he wanted to be a flamenco guitarist, or whether he wanted to be a fine art painter, or whether he wanted to be a graphic designer or an illustrator. He really enjoyed all the different forms of creativity and expression, but he just felt this kind of social kind of conflict, like he was supposed to choose one particular path.
Yeah.
And he couldn't really cope with the pressure of having to decide on which path to take. And then he met this Buddhist guy called Frank in Holland Park, and Frank sort of just said to him, "Well, don't do anything." And my dad just thought that was an absolute revelation, and literally just gave up everything, apart from the Mayflower book covers, which he had started at the time. He carried on doing that because he enjoyed doing that, and because it actually, although he was working to a brief, the brief was really, really loose. And one of the things that's kind of quite interesting is that a lot of people, the blogs that I read, a lot of people say, "Well, book covers has got nothing to do with the books." And they're absolutely right, because my dad never read the books. He wasn't really actually, again, he wasn't interested in science fiction either. He was just interested in the form of expression. And I think he was chosen because of the impact his images had. And so one of the reasons why he continued doing it was because, although he was working to a brief, he was given a lot of freedom to do whatever he wanted, as long as it kind of loosely followed the title of the book, or the basic kind of plot of the book. They were happy. So when he got involved with the Buddhists, he started doing all these kind of Buddhist practices. He was meditating a lot, and that's when his style completely changed again, and he started all this kind of Buddhist referencing kind of came into his cover works, and because he had the freedom, he was able to loosely tie it into the book, but also paint exactly what he wanted to paint. And I think that's what kind of kept him doing it. Plus, also, he moved into this Buddhist commune, and he was one of the only ones that was earning money, and all the money he earned from these covers went straight to the commune.
Wow. A couple of observations there. Well, first of all, bumping into a Buddhist in London in the 1970s and taking existential advice off them is about as Moorcockian
I mean,
an episode as you could possibly imagine.
Although he was a Buddhist, he was actually an American. He was an American sailor who had kind of dropped out of the Navy, and was hanging out with all the beat poets and everything in New York, and then went to, his mum was a communist, and she was a Belgian communist, and he went to Belgium, kind of worked there and learned the language, because he wanted to kind of have what he thought was a normal life. But he'd been interested in philosophy with the beat poets. He'd been interested in philosophy and Buddhism then. And then when he came from Belgium, he came to England and met, I'm not going to be able to remember the name now. He was a Buddhist monk. I when you guys start talking a bit, I'll look up the name and I'll have to come back to it.
Yeah.
But this Buddhist monk, he had some real kind of strong spiritual kind of awakenings with this Buddhist monk, and the Buddhist monk gave him a whole load of money and said, like, go out and choose some people to receive the teaching. And he found my dad in Holland Park.
Wow, that's incredible. And the other thing I was gonna say was that the observation that his books may not have had the most tight relationship to the contents of the books because they were so vivid. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that when people other than myself, but people of kind of my generation, and even people right now who are going into, I don't know, the old Pier bookshop in Morecambe or wherever, when they're looking through that section and they see a Bob Haberfield cover, that will attract people to the contents of the book, whether they understand the connection or not, because they are absolutely wild and unlike anything else that you could possibly see. And again, I'm going to ask you, Dave, what your favourite Haberfield cover is in a second. And I thought about this really, really long and hard. And it was between the final programme and Behold the Man, but I had to settle on the final programme. And actually, if you take the culmination of the final programme,
I know another one of my mum.
Yeah, if you take the climax of the final programme and understand that very final bit, it is absolutely relevant to the contents of the book. But if you were to pick this book up off a shelf and look at that cover, you would honestly think, what the fuck is this book about? And I think that is absolutely one of the major attractions. And I think Moorcock was incredibly lucky to have someone like this illustrating the books, and just because it was the runner-up, this is a much more sober and serene compared to the last one. But the cover to the Mayflower edition of Behold the Man is my runner-up.
All right, okay, yeah.
That is my runner-up. But how about you, Dave?
Yeah. Oh man, I mean, yeah, that final program cover is just absolutely just a perfect batshit crazy psychedelic masterpiece. When I saw that thing for the first time, I mean, yeah, I had to get it. The other one for me would probably be the Knight of the Swords, with just, presumably, Coram in the middle facing up against, I mean, in the story, I mean, it's honestly like, that's the thing. Even though, it may not be specifically trying to adapt certain moments from the books, I find a lot of the time, in an abstract way, it absolutely does actually end up representing the book very well. For the Knight of the Swords cover, I mean, the giant, demon that's facing the hero there, I mean, that's pretty much a good representation of Arioch in that story. Another one I like a lot is a lot of the Coram ones that he did. The was it the King of the Swords also? Yeah, with the giant woman-shaped temple and the bloody hand holding an eye and the dagger in its palm, and this purple robed figure with this golden scimitar. Now maybe that one doesn't fit so well, but it's just a beautiful image. I love that one a lot. Those are probably my favorites.
The reason why he was chosen was because of the impact that his images had. But I got an email from Michael Moorcock shortly after my dad's death, and he said that he said how he kind of first met my dad, and how he kind of saw these. He went into the office and he kind of saw these images. I think at the time Bob had done like a few images for some other books, and he may have had a few other images in there that that hadn't been used for books, but he was just showing to the company. And Moorcock said that he saw these images and just sort of straight away said, I want him to do my book covers.
Yeah.
You said that you found all of these boards at your dad's house. What was the method that he worked in to create these images? Because again, it's not just the imagery that's striking, but the colours, and they're so clean in terms of lines and definition.
They're done in they're done on kind of like sort of A3 size boards, so they're sort of, you know, they're a good size, and they're done with gouache and airbrush he used as well.
Yeah.
Wow, you're gonna have to explain to me as a complete idiot when it comes to anything artistic. What's gouache?
Well, gouache is kind of well, it's kind of somewhere in between watercolor and acrylic paint.
Right.
So it's kind of, it's not as delicate as a watercolor, but it's not as kind of plasticky as an acrylic paint.
Okay.
So it's got this really, you know, the colors that can be, you get this real richness in the color, and I mean he was just a master at detail. I mean, when you see these, you don't really catch it on the books, but when you see them in A3 size, just the actual detail in them is just staggering. You know, there's one that he did. It's not a Moorcock book. I can't remember who it was for, but it's in it. There's a tree, and every single leaf in the tree is an eye, and it's just, you know, you just I mean, there's hundreds of these leaves in this tree, and when you look closer, you're like, oh my god, they're all eyes. And just, you know, it's the detail of it, and the shading, his ability of shading is, I mean, that stuff's done really easily now on computers, you know, with gradients and things like that. But do that kind of quality of shading by hand is, you know, really something.
Yeah, and again, it's striking looking at these, and as he said, these days with computers and with all the programs and everything else, the fact that people can achieve a lot of these textures, but to actually have done it by hand with airbrushing techniques and the things you've mentioned, my God, what I wouldn't give to visit a gallery when all of this stuff is on display. Dave, we're going to have to make a pact that,
all right,
when this happens, that we meet up for the first time in person.
Flying out there, that sounds awesome.
At a Haberfield exhibition, because you've seen him in A3. Good Lord.
Oh, yeah.
So we know him for these what essentially were pulp fantasy and science fiction covers, and although, you know, pulp sci-fi and fantasy is, even then, was considered a fairly throwaway thing, his work has endured because, again, I went in the LPA bookshop in Morecambe when we were on holiday a couple of weeks ago, and there must have been a dozen Haberfield covered Michael Moorcock books there on the shelf.
Yeah, right.
They persist, they're there, people can still find them. So for me, you know, I'll always inevitably connect Bob Haberfield with Michael Moorcock. But what else was he doing? I've seen some of the images that you've posted on your Instagram account. Some of the pencil work, and it's all absolutely beautiful. But what else was he working on?
Well, he's got so many different styles and so many bows to his string. I mean, he after, when he stopped doing the book covers, he went into kind of commercial illustration, advertising illustration. So he was doing stuff for, I mean, as I've posted stuff for like Cointreau and Captain Morgan's Rum. He also did a whole load for Sainsbury's, for Waitrose, for Lipton's tea. He became very, very well known for his orange. He was he painted oranges absolutely exquisitely. I mean, they were kind of photorealistic, which back in, I mean, you look at photorealistic images on Instagram now, and everyone's doing it. But back then, there was very, very few people doing it. And you know, just again, just the sheer detail that he was able to get into his images was really quite breathtaking. So that was what he did for his, you know, to make a living. I mean, he kind of got disillusioned with the art world. He didn't like the idea of having to kind of sell himself, and he kind of felt that that if he was to follow an art, you know, a career in fine arts where he was having to sell his paintings to private collectors, he felt that he would have to compromise his art to be doing something that people would want to buy rather than doing what he really wanted to do. So he just decided that the most honest thing for him to do, the most honest way for him to make money, which in the art world is really kind of looked down upon, was to do commercial art, to do illustration, and he just felt it was an honest transaction. Someone came to him and they said, "Look, we want a picture of an orange, and we'll pay you this much." And then Bob could paint that in a short period of time, get paid a certain amount, and then it gave him the freedom and the time to go and paint what he wanted to do. And that's the real Bob Haberfield, are the paintings that he did for himself. And these are paintings that nobody has ever seen, because he never exhibited. Wow. I mean, his house, every single inch of wall space was covered with his own artwork. And he just did it for the sheer love of painting. That's just what he absolutely loved to do. And he had, even with his own paintings, he had such a variety of styles and themes going on. Some of them were really, really childlike and really, really loose. I mean, if you imagine, his commercial work was so tight and so detailed. So the last thing he really wanted to do when he was doing his own painting was another detailed painting. He wanted to paint like a child, and he was very, very childlike in his manner. So that kind of came out a lot in his artwork. He had this real kind of sense of innocence about him. So yeah.
Yeah, so I understand from your posts that you have a couple of book projects, or you have one book project underway that's going to result. The outcome will be two different books. One of which will be some of his unpublished stuff. So, can you tell us about the book projects? Because I understand that you're undertaking it with John Davey.
That's right, yeah. Who did the James Cawthorne, The Man and His Art?
Yes, book, which is an absolutely beautiful book.
Yeah. Well, I got in touch. What happened was after when my dad died. I mean, he died kind of quite suddenly. And when my dad was, he was a very healthy man. I mean, he gave up alcohol. He was an alcoholic for many, many years, quite a full-on alcoholic. And he gave that up, and he started living an extremely healthy lifestyle. He didn't eat meat. He exercised every day. He didn't smoke, didn't drink. And so I was expecting him to go on well into his 90s quite easily. And then at the age of 82, he kind of died quite suddenly. Which in some respects I think he would have been kind of quite happy with, because for Bob it was all about quality of life rather than quantity of life. So he would have rather have kind of gone in a quick fashion rather than it being a long drawn out thing where he kind of lost his mobility and lost his ability to paint and things like that. So after he died, I became the custodian of a huge amount of artwork. I mean, we are talking, his whole house was full of it. I live in France, so I had to go to his house in Wales and pack it all up and put it in a trailer and bring it back to my home here in France. I put as many of the paintings that he had on his walls, I put up onto my walls, because if he put them on his walls, they were the most important paintings for him, because they were the ones that he wanted to look at all the time.
Yeah.
But then I was left with portfolios just stacked full of paintings and planchettes full of drawings and stuff. And I just was kind of scratching my head thinking, well, what am I going to do with all this stuff? And then I kind of, with the science fiction book covers, I realized, well, this is what he's most known for. So this is obviously going to be the doorway into. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was that I wanted to put a book together of his artwork, because one of the last things he did before he died was put together a catalogue of about 700 or 800 paintings. Now, I thought this was his entire works, but I kind of soon realised that this was just a small percentage of his works and the works that he liked best. So I kind of thought to myself, well, I would like to turn this into a book. So I reached out to the science fiction world. I sent out a bunch of emails to people. And one of the first replies I got was from John Guy Collick, who was a tremendous help. He kind of sent out lots of emails to lots of people, and we discussed all different kind of ideas. And I was kind of thinking, am I going to sell these images? Am I going to give them to museums, or am I going to try and do galleries with them? And then he kind of brought up the book again, which is, as I said, was one of the first things that came to my head. And he put me in touch with John Davey, and we had his first reaction. John Davies' first reaction was he was very busy at the time. He just finished the James Cawthorne book, which he took him a few years, I think, and really took it out of him. And so he didn't really want to commit to the project. And we had a Zoom meeting, and it was really quite funny actually, because I was kind of under the impression that he was going to turn it down. But he was really, really enthusiastic about it. And he was kind of saying, we could do this, we could do that. And by the end of the conversation, he talked himself into it. And I really and so I was like, oh, great. Okay, so you're on board then. And then ever since, it's just been absolutely, I've been so lucky to have both Johns on this project with me, and they've just been an absolute wealth of information, and giving me great advice and kind of helping me lead me in the right direction down this journey. Because as I've already said, I don't really know much about the science fiction world, and I know nothing about publishing books, and so they've been a great help. It's been a very kind of long, slow process, which has actually suited me really well, because I've got 2 young kids and I can't devote all my time to this. So the pace for me has been absolutely perfect. But the reason it's kind of, well, the first thing we had to work out was, what content have we got? So I had to put together all the content. And that's when I then realized that there wasn't 700 paintings in my dad's collection, but it was more like 2,000 images.
Oh, wow.
Whoa.
And then he was also quite a distinguished poet as well, which I had no idea about until I kind of found these folders stuffed full of dog-eared pieces of paper with handwritten poems on, and a lot of them were illustrated. So I kind of got together as much of all the imagery that I could find, anything that he'd done, things like birthday cards, Christmas cards. He sent out emails, because I had his computer, so I was going through his computer and finding all this stuff that he'd done. And then I kind of presented it all to John Davy and John Collick, and we kind of looked at it all. And the initial kind of idea was, there's actually a lot more books in all this content, but there's kind of 2 jumped out at us, and that was the commercial art and his own painting, because those are the 2 main kind of categories of everything. And so we were kind of bouncing ideas back and forward for a very long time. And then at one point, I sent emails out to a bunch of my dad's friends to ask them to write memoirs about him. And we got some fantastic stuff back. And one of his really old friends also wrote a piece about my dad's artwork, which was a book in itself. And so then then it was like, well, okay, well, what about 3 books? And so then we were toying with 3 books for a while. And then there was another book that my dad had actually already made on one of what I considered to be the kind of series of paintings that are probably the most dear to my father, which were called the Harmless World series. And they're very, very kind of childlike images, but beautifully done, really innocent, really lovely. And he compiled it into a little kind of children's book. And so I wanted to kind of add that in as well. So at one point there was going to be 4 books, and then kind of sanity prevailed, and we after everything, we kind of went, look, let's rein this in a little bit, and we brought it back. We actually kind of decided at that point to do 1 book, but have everything in it. And then we started doing John Davies started the pagination of just working on all the images from my dad's catalogue. And that was it was just like, I then kind of said, well, hang on a minute, because in that collection, there are a few of the science fiction covers. And I just kind of looked at it and just went, well, the science fiction fans aren't going to really dig this book very much, because there's not really that much science fiction. And even if we put like a little section at the end of the book, it's primarily a fine art book. So at that point, we then kind of thought, let's go back to the 2-book strategy and have 1 book that's going to focus on the science fiction book covers, the record covers, and some of his better known illustrations, and then have the other book as the fine art book. But we'll present them together in a slipcase, and then kind of everyone's happy. Because I know that the book my dad wanted to make was the catalogue, what he catalogued. So it's kind of keeping my dad happy, and it's the book that are his favourite images, and then the other book is kind of keeping everybody else happy. It's going to have all the science fiction stuff in it, and we've got some great pieces written by a bunch of different people. John Davies written some pieces, Michael Moorcock's written something, John Collett's written something, a couple of other people whose names I can't remember right now have also written something. And then we've got this fantastic memoir that's been written by one of my dad's oldest friends. They were in the national service together in Australia as kids. So he's written a really candid memoir of my dad. So that will go in one book, and then I've written a memoir. His memoir will go in the science fiction book, and then I've written a memoir that will go in the dad selection book. So hopefully they're going to be two fantastic books. Well, I've no doubt they will be, because the images in them are just absolutely spectacular.
It must be incredibly rewarding for you as well to be in receipt of these memoirs from his friends, and be able to be able to absorb all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. It's the old thing of, after someone's gone, you think of all the questions you want to ask them.
Yeah,
and obviously when someone's died, you can't phone them up and say, oh, I wanted to ask you this, that, and the other. It's it. That's it. It's you can't glean any more information from that person. So getting the memoirs from his friends, from people he's known for his whole life, has just been so richly rewarding for me, to just purely to kind of, because it's answered so many questions for me. And it's kind of, in many ways, it's helped me kind of feel my dad's spirit still around me. And yeah, I mean, I can't really thank the people enough that have written and told me their stories. It's just been great, and I'm learning more, because I'm still talking to people and hearing what they've their encounters and their thoughts and things. And I mean, my house, I've got all my dad's paintings surrounding me in my house. I've also, because he's a Buddhist, he had a shrine of all his kind of favorite little knick-knacky things and little Buddhas and things, and I've recreated that in my house exactly as he had it. So I really feel him around me. So the whole journey has been a real kind of learning journey, and a way for me to mourn him as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful lesson for all of us to memorialize people that we've lost, and what a fantastic way that you found to do this. It's absolutely incredible. So what are the timelines on the publication of these books?
That's the $1 million question. I mean, not anytime soon. I mean, we've only just started the pagination of the first book. I think we've now got it to the point where we are happy with what images go on what pages, and so then it's a matter of doing the layouts, kind of actually working out where the images go on each page. John Collick is currently proofreading all the text that's going to go into it. I'm still finishing off my text, because I wrote it kind of about 6 months ago and then left it, and I've just kind of, John Davies just kind of turned around and said to me, okay, we're ready for the text. And I said, well, I just want to read it one more time. And I read through it one more time and really didn't like it. And so I had to say to him, look, I've got to rewrite this, because I wanted to include a lot more detail, because in that last 6 months I'd learned so much more, and there was so much great stuff that I just wanted to put in to the story, because I mean, I'm probably biased because he's my dad, but for me, the story absolutely fascinated me, and I hope it will bring interest to other people. So I'm kind of currently rewriting it, and which I've almost finished. So, but that's just the first book, and then we've got to start the whole process again with the other book. So yeah, there's no timeline at the moment.
So what other activities have you got going on? Because I know you've started the Instagram account to memorialise your dad's work. What else does the future hold for the Haberfield archive?
Well, I mean, so the Instagram feed at the moment, I'm only doing images that haven't made it in, or mostly haven't made it into the book, because I don't really want to give too much away yet.
Yeah.
And there's still so many fantastic images that aren't going to be going into the book, so I kind of thought that was an avenue for that. And then there's the website that I've set up, which the main aim of the website is to house the master catalogue, is what we're calling it, is what I'm doing. So I'm as I said, I'm cataloguing absolutely everything that my dad has done, including all the photographs that I've got of him, and kind of letters that I think are of interest. So all of that will all be housed on this website. Once that's all done, once the master catalogue is put together, we can then start thinking about exhibitions, doing things like posters. I mean, at the moment, the focus is mainly on these two books and getting this database together. Then once that's done, then the doors can open to other projects. So the website mainly will house this database. So anyone will be able to go onto it and see his whole collection of work.
Oh, wonderful. I suppose one of the great things about the internet, isn't it, is you work and you live your entire life knowing very little about the things that influence you and the things that stick in your brain, and those images that are burned into your mind, and then all of a sudden something pops up and then it's all there. All the information's there. All the imagery is there. It's so exciting. For fans like us, it is so exciting.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, I'm really glad to hear that. I mean, it's funny because I mean, I studied fine art painting, but I kind of gave it up a long time ago. So I know a little bit about the fine art world and how it works. But since working on this project and kind of setting up, the Instagram account and checking out what other people are doing, I'm actually kind of finding it a little bit daunting at times, because there's just so much incredible artwork out there. It seems like with the internet. I mean, when I was studying fine art painting, there was no such thing as the internet. So you only knew about other painters by going to galleries and going to art bookshops and buying books. Whereas now it's all readily available for you on the web, and it's quite daunting how much there is out there and how much amazing stuff there is out there. And then to think, well, how is anyone going to find what I'm doing? I kind of take my hat off to artists these days, because it just must be so difficult.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, we've talked about it, haven't we? The grand democratization of art, and I've discussed this with Dave regarding its music. I've discussed this with Alistair Thompson regarding his book. It's in many ways it's enormously encouraging that it's there as a forum.
Yep.
But actually, to get it noticed amongst the sea of stuff.
Yeah, therein lies the challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, you're experiencing that right now, aren't you, Dave? Although, to be fair, Dave, your work is getting a lot of notice.
My stuff is somehow, thankfully, way exceeded any of my expectations.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of putting your father's artwork out there, I mean, I think it truly is just so unique and so amazingly eye-catching and beautiful to look at. I mean, obviously, I'm speaking as a fan who's only really familiar with the sci-fi artwork. So then to hear that there's also all this, I mean, you say, around 2,000 other paintings that none of us have ever even seen. I mean, just as an admirer of his technique and his imagination, I'm very, very interested in looking forward to seeing all the rest of these. I think that your father's art has a quality that is hard to turn away from. I don't think you could just scroll past a Bob Haberfield painting. you know, in
No
an
way.
Instagram feed. You catch a glimpse of the thing, and you just have to, you just kind of become enveloped by it. You got to be like, wow, look at that. So I think I wouldn't worry too much in your place there. That's some phenomenal stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, the ultimate goal is really just to preserve his legacy. I mean, that's kind of my main focus. The last thing that I wanted was just for all these images to just sit in a folder in a drawer and never see the light of day. So the initial challenge for me was always going to be, how do I get it out there? And the internet is the best way to do that, because you can just, as I said, once it's all digitized, I can dump it all onto the website, and there it is, it's there. And as long as the website is online, the legacy is preserved. I mean, I guess in some respects, I'm fortunate enough that he was well known enough for one particular form of his artwork, and maybe that interest, will help kind of lead people into having a look at his other stuff. But if it doesn't go any further than just getting the website up and running and all the artwork on the website, then that's fine, and I've done my job. So I kind of I'm happy either way, whichever way it goes, really.
I think undoubtedly it absolutely will. And it's funny, I've been thinking about this week, because visual art is one of those things where I think it faces a lot of unique challenges at the moment, particularly in the world of the internet, because there are all these AI art applications.
Yep.
And there are people all over social media posting really striking imagery that's created with AI applications.
Yeah.
But one thing you can absolutely guarantee is no AI art application can ever get anywhere near recreating anything like a Bob Haberfield Mocock cover. They are so unique. The vision is so particular and so focused on a specific style. And the interpretations of the material are so unique to the artist behind them that there is no way in a million years an AI art app could ever, number one, reproduce that. And there's also no way in a million years that any number of websites, whether it be ArtStation or any of these others, could ever come up with something as vivid or unique. That specific tone and voice that art has, if that's even the correct expression.
Yeah. Well, I remember as a child seeing my dad painting this orange, and which looked like a photograph. And I said to my dad, I said, why are they paying you so much money to paint an orange when all they need to do, I can take a photograph of an orange and it'll look the same.
Yeah.
And he said to me, because there's a certain mystique about the fact that this is being drawn by hand. This is hand done, rather than a kind of a scientific process, or be it an AI program. It's done by the hand, and that's the mystique, and that's where that's what makes it so special.
The other thing as well that I think makes this guaranteed to be something different to anything else is that Dave and I are not alone when it comes to our love for Bob Haberfield covers and for the impact that they had on us. When it comes to people who are out there who have a copy of the Mayflower edition of whatever it may be, Stealer of Souls, Winds of Limbo with the Fire Clown on the cover, or the Room Staff series, the amount of people who are out there who adore these covers and to whom Bob Haberfield is a mystery. Well, we are legion. There are a lot of us about. There are a lot of us about, and the fact that we now have the opportunity to find out more is priceless.
Well, that's what I'm really hoping that these books will achieve, because I think, I mean, I'm really happy with the text that's in them. I think they really give it a really good insight to who he was.
Yeah.
And kind of why he kind of created these images. It's just going back to something that we said, kind of we talked about before, and the fact that he didn't really. A lot of people don't understand the imagery that he. A lot of people said, I love the imagery so much, but it just went way over my head, and because a lot of the people were because it's going back 50 years now, they were pretty young when they were looking at these imagery. So it's quite understandable that they're not really going to understand it, particularly as a lot of it is kind of Tibetan symbolism and stuff like that. So, why would they understand it? And a lot of the comments were that they didn't really understand it, but they absolutely loved the imagery.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was that they didn't really always understand the connection between the image and the book. But what I'm kind of hoping is that through this the book that's the second book, the science fiction book, and well, both books actually, because both books have great memoirs about my dad. But what I'm hoping is that they'll give the fans, say, a bit more of an inside knowledge into my dad and who he was and what he was going through when he painted these images.
Yes.
Maybe that in turn will help them understand the images better.
Yeah.
But having said that, one of the things that me and my dad spoke about a lot when we spoke about the fine art world was that the painter who makes the image, they obviously know what the image means to them, but the viewer of that image doesn't have to have the same interpretation. They're entitled to have whatever interpretation they like. Yep. And and that's kind of the beauty of art, is that everyone can interpret it, whether be it music, be it literature, be it painting, be it whatever. Everyone can interpret it in a completely different way. And so there's no real desire to force people to understand the imagery. They just need. It's up to them to look at it and see what it means to them. And I think most people, that's exactly what they did, because as a lot of people said, the imagery just went way over their head, and they just absolutely loved it, and it meant something completely different from what it probably did to my dad.
That's the beauty of art, isn't it? And
absolutely.
I think something Dave might be able to identify with as well is when I was reading a lot of these, and when I was looking at a lot of these back in the day, I was taking a shitload of mushrooms as well. so yeah, I don't know a thing about Buddhism, but I do know that I love great art, and kind of looking at art like this, and having that kind of mindset where you're maybe, let's say, reaching out into the further recesses of your mind. This stuff really, really struck a chord with me.
Oh yeah, and so actually, I am somewhat familiar with Buddhism. My mom studied it for a while. She actually went to Tibet. Actually, she got arrested by the Chinese government for asking the Dalai Lama too many questions. So she spent 3 hours being interrogated after meeting the Dalai Lama. Anyway, we've had monks over for dinner and stuff like that. I've always been really fascinated with it. And actually, I always found the covers to be kind of perfect, like metaphorical representations of what's going on with the Eternal Champion character. Just to briefly explain the science fiction-y part of what's going on. There is this one consciousness keeps traveling through time, space, different realities, and inhabiting basically these different bodies at one point, but he can't remember the past lives. So it's very much kind of a like the karmic cycle of reincarnation going on with the Eternal Champion stories. I thought they were totally perfect representations, honestly, of what's really going on a deeper level than you might just get from like your standard fantasy painting of like, here's a muscular guy half naked with a sword, and some babe on his leg or something like you usually get. I mean, I love Frazetta, but there's a bit more going on here with the Haberfield stuff. So I think a lot of that's actually perfect for specifically Michael Moorcock's stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, my dad was doing a lot of meditation when he was doing all these images, and a lot of the images were taken from dreams that came to him and images that came to him while he was meditating. And so probably on as you say, on a kind of more kind of subconscious level, there is probably a really great connection going on there between the stories and his artwork.
You can see there, Ben, why I like having Dave on the podcast, because I'm extraordinarily shallow. And Dave brings an additional dimension to the analysis.
Hey, don't worry.
I think on that, just gonna say, you know what, Ben, it's been absolutely brilliant having you on, and we will really follow the progress of your book projects really keenly, because quite apart from the fact that the James Cawthorne book is brilliant, but John Davies' Jade Design website is almost like if you could have a pilgrimage site on a website for Moorcock fans, John Davy is the guy who runs that website with Jade Design. It's just been brilliant hearing about your dad and about his impact and his wider work, and all we can say is we're absolutely delighted that you took the time to come on and talk to us about it.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been really nice to just to discuss it. Really, I mean, it's been. I mean, most of because I live in France and they live in England. Most of it's all emails. I think I've had 2 or 3 Zoom meetings with both the Johns. So it's just nice to be able to actually have a conversation about it with someone. So thank you very much.
This has been an absolute pleasure. Massive thanks to Ben for joining us in Derry and Tom's. That artwork has been in my brain for such a long time. It's great to finally know something about the man behind it and to get a hint of what's coming down the track. I'll post links to Ben's website and Instagram page in the show notes, so subscribe and keep your eyes peeled for those art posts and further news about the coming books. Before we go, thanks as ever to our patrons. First, those without tier: Anthony Piconti, Sebastian Weetabix, Tim Cardos and Dave Dempster. Hope those peepers are doing better, Dave. And to our chaos engineers: Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Van Ness, Anthony Porter, Ben Fletcher, Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, Fred Quiche, Jim Kirkland, John Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Matt Saltz, Menyon, Nelbert, Paul McRandall, Simon Perrins and Tony Malazzo. And of course, thanks to our Jugaderos: Alexander Harris, Dave Dalrymple, Ian Stead, Loz, Taylor, Matthew Broom, Toby White, Tom Murphy, Mark Hebden and Jason Connolly. Now, Jason dropped me a message since the last show to say, "My entry into Pulp Fiction started young with listening to the Shadow radio programme with my mother and her taking me to see the silent version of Phantom of the Opera and my reading that book before I was 10. I'm a little embarrassed to say I came to Moorcock through RPGs and have only in the last decade or so really dived into his work. By the way, I found out about your show through your interview with Rob over at Confessions of a Wee Timorous Bushi and have since plugged that episode on my podcast. I've only started listening to your back catalogue, but RPGs are near to my heart, so I skipped there and enjoyed that show. If you haven't done a follow-up, I'd love to hear more of your experiences and how your Moorcockian game is developing." Well, thanks Jason, much appreciated, and, as you asked, so shall you receive. Of course, we've done parts 2 and 3 of Moorcock and RPGs, but Dave and I hopped into Derry and Tom's with Clarky the Cruel this past week to do part 4. More on that soon. Jason himself is a seasoned podcaster, and you can find his show, The Nerds RPG Variety Cast, on Anchor or any other good podcatcher. And finally, eternal thanks to our patron demons: Joe Monty, Clarky the Cruel, Andy Darby, Gareth Wilson, Imria, Janie Stim, Lapsed Gamer, Liam J, Miles Reed Labato, Dread Mortmain, Neil Burton, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, the OG patron Norman Beresford, and last, but of course never least, Robert McMillan. Right, onwards to the finish line, but before we wrap up, we got a comment on our Elric of Melniboné Part 2 episode on YouTube. Jackson Vega said, "These are rather excellent gents. Bravo from Blackburn." All power to you, Jackson Vega, and our best to Blackburn. We haven't been for a while, but it's in our stars. So, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. You can listen to Breakfast in the Ruins radio via the internet, most easily via Radio Garden in either app or browser. We have our Patreon page too, and there are a few extra odds and sods on there. But in the meantime, take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.
Like no prompts needed.
No, I've got to say those books are going to be an instant order for me.
Oh yeah,
because I got you mentioned the James Cawthorne book. It's
yeah,
really great. I think John Davey put it together with Cawthorne's sister.
gotcha.
And there are a ton of unused pencil sketches of other Eternal Champion characters that were never used.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's really
nice. I've not seen that book yet. I've seen certain excerpts from it.
Yeah.
And obviously, I have the Cawthorne collection here from Titan Comics. Side note, who now have the rights to Conan the Barbarian's comic license, so that should be interesting. Yeah.
So it's moved on from Marvel.
Oh yeah. It's moved on from Marvel, and now it's at Titan. But actually, one of the writers on Marvel, the Marvel series, Jim Zub, who did some of the better of the Marvel run, he'll be, I think, writing at least the first issue or the first run or something like that. I don't know about the art yet.
Okay,
but
so with the Conan adaptations, I got really excited about the Dark Horse adaptations when Kurt Busiek and Carrie Nord were doing it.
Oh man, that was great, and all the way up through Tomas Giorello's run was really amazing.
Stuff was really, really good.
Oh man, that guy is genius.
But I think it really started to sag a little bit.
Yeah.
I quite like the Queen of the Black Coast stuff, but there was
some cool stuff in there.
Did start to sag a little bit, and then of course Dark Horse lost it. It went to Marvel. I've not seen any of the Marvel stuff, but now Marvel have lost it. It's gone to Titan.
Now it's gone to Titan. Yeah. The Marvel stuff was just kind of mediocre for most of it. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. It just kind of, even with a writer I usually like, Jason Aaron, it was just okay. The art was pretty good by Mahmoud Asrar. Totally just butchered that. Sorry. But overall, it was just kind of, it was okay.
I think there were some really sweet spots with the Dark Horse stuff. I think the early Carrie Nord, Kurt Busiek stuff, Thieves in the House, and all that lot was absolutely brilliant. But I definitely got the impression that the artwork started to get rushed.
Oh yeah, and
towards the end of Carrie Nord's run, it started to look a little bit rushed. But the Thomas Giorello Born on the Battlefield stuff was fucking wonderful.
Giorello, he came in, he started on Rogues in the House, and he just kept getting better all the way up through, was it Free Company? I think he was still doing it. Definitely up to and including Black Colossus, which is one of my favorite Conan stories. Total quintessential Conan. But
we need to do a fucking Conan story.
I'm down.
Yeah.
Let me know when and where.
Yeah, because I did Tower of the Elephant with Phil on the first ever birthday episode, because Phil had never read a Conan story.
Oh man!
So we did Tower of the Elephant, and we need to go back and do another Conan story at some point.
I'm definitely down. You let me know. I will. I got them all.
Well, I'll tell you what. We'll get Mad God's Amulet done.
Yeah,
and then we'll pick a nice, tidy 60 to 70 page sweet Conan story, Hour of the Dragon, maybe, something like that.
That's a bit much. That's a bit long. That's like the only novel.
Is Hour of the Dragon
novel length? No, I mean not really. It's about a Moorcock novel length. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah. So but every other one, obviously, it's more like 80 pages is probably like the longest one. You know, after that. So any other one of the stories. Although that being said, I mean, I would be down to cover that book. I did in fact write a song summarizing that book on my first album.
Of course you did. Yeah.
Yes, I did.
I just got a bunch of the Modifius 2D20 Conan RPG books for my birthday.
Nice.
because it's my 50th birthday. So I ended up getting like half a dozen Conan, the Modifius Conan role playing game supplements, which I still haven't looked at. And I'd got the Cull of Atlantis supplement a while back.
Nice.
And I don't know
that's
why
cool.
I asked for this stuff, because I don't even particularly like the 2D20 Conan
Yeah.
system. I'm too lazy to read complicated role playing systems these days.
Yeah, I understand it. I got all of them on a digital Humble Bundle deal.
Yeah.
I'm just like, well, okay, sure. Why not? I'll throw down for that. I looked through them briefly. I
The
appreciated the effort.
The fluff is pretty good. The fluff is pretty good. But
don't know when I'll ever use it.
Yeah, I'll never use it.
Yeah.
When the Mongoose system came out, Mongoose Conan game came out, the first one was so full of typos, it was fucking horrendous. Mongoose were a company that I think they expanded too fast, couldn't afford proofreaders, so much of their shit was absolutely terribly edited. They did
That's unfortunate.
They did a Hawkmoon game. They did an Elric of Melniboné game, and the first editions. They only did one edition of Hawkmoon, and it was okay. It was okay. But the Conan stuff by Ian Sturrock, that was all right. It's pretty good stuff. But once you got into all the fluff and all the splat books, the quality really started to dip. So I should have known with Modifius that I shouldn't go down that same route of getting. I just didn't know what to tell people to get me. It was either bottle of whiskey or something like that. One thing about Conan is that when it comes to Moorcock, Elric, Hawkmoon, whatever, whilst I appreciate the artwork of P. Craig Russell and people like that, I really don't get excited about Moorcock comics.
I think there really hasn't been sort of a really satisfying definitive interpretation. There have been some really good ones of Elric, but I mean, Corum. I mean, I like Mike Mignola's artwork on the series, but Corum himself just got like this huge like schnoz. He's just a weird looking dude. You're like, where did you even pull that out? He's supposed to be like super good looking elfin dude, and he just looks like, I don't know. Yeah, he looks really freakish, which is kind of cool. But it just didn't really do it.
I was thinking about it a while back, and I was thinking because Loz had said, "Oh, I've been buying the Titan reprints."
Yeah,
and a couple of people have said, "When are you going to do an episode around P. Craig Russell adaptations or whatever?" And I was thinking, why don't I get excited about these things? And even the Julian Blondell ones, I've bought them.
Yeah,
I've got them.
Yeah,
I've looked at them.
Yeah.
And I can't really think of anything substantial to say about them.
Yeah.
So why do I get really into Conan adaptations and not Moorcock adaptations? And I think it all comes down to the energy of the stories. And I love Moorcock in print.
Yeah.
It's not really... A comic adaptation isn't really for me.
Yeah.
But the Conan stories are all about forward propulsion, energy, violence...
Splitting skulls.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I was talking to Phil when we did the Windsor Gaff the last episode, I think at one point I talked about there's a real beauty of the Conan stories, and I can't remember whether it's actually a Robert E. Howard tale. I don't think it is. I think it's one of the either Lynn Carter or Sprague de Camp or someone else. There's a story where shit kicks off at a feast and Conan beats people to death with a ham.
In Rogues in the House, I think it is, there is a part where Conan is in prison. That's how he starts the story off. And I believe he brains a guard with a mutton bone. That is in the actual stories.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure there's one where he's at a feast and things kick off and he's slaying people with a ham or a leg of lamb or whatever the fuck it is. He's beating fools down with a ham. You can do that in a comic.
Yeah. The more kind of esoteric musings about the universe and,
absolutely.
Order and chaos. Yeah, it just doesn't really... It's great in print. I think that's also the thing why there just really hasn't been a, any really kind of successful, like film adaptation of Moorcock, and why Moorcock was reticent to sort of agree to the... to any sort of movie projects too, is because either people threw out all the substance, or their take on it just was not, it just would not have been satisfying. I remember he also read one interview where he just said, well, I resisted all throughout the 70s and the 60s and stuff, just because the visual effects were just too cheesy. So
Yeah.
even back then, a man in his time looking at visual effects were just like, this just there's no way this is ever going to possibly, capture my ideas.
Yeah.
And I got to respect him for that. I mean, as zany as his 70s, attempt at anything that he wrote would have been kind of cool to see. It would have been for other reasons than he probably would have liked people to enjoy the movie for, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. One day, maybe.
Hopefully, we'll see how that Hawkmoon adaptation goes.
Yeah, I don't know. The
Yeah.
more time goes by, the less I
Yeah.
think it's going to happen. I know that Moorcock had said that. I think on the Facebook site, I can't bring myself to go back on Facebook to actually get this stuff firsthand. But I do understand that it said that he'd seen the script and some concept artwork, and he really dug it. But I don't know. I don't know whether it'll
Yeah.
happen or not. I don't know. And in a way, I'm fine with that because my head canon, when it comes to
Yeah.
Moorcock, is the most important thing to me. And I think that's why you're absolutely right when it comes to the esoteric stuff and kind of the existential conversations. Do I want to read a Coram comic? No, not really. I
Yeah.
want to see Conan braining people with hams. That's what I want from a comic.
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm,
That's what the action is served best on the page. I mean, yeah, I mean, how interesting, or just a series of panels of people just going, for like pages and pages of this, trippy as it might be. I will have to give it to P. Craig Russell, though. I mean, he did a really good job of making stuff just at least really colorful and cool.
There's no question in his art.
Even though his Elric looks just kind of really silly to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's no question in his artwork. I don't particularly like his Yerkoon. Anyway, but there's no question his artwork's great. He's a really talented artist, and it's the same with the Julian Blondell recent Elric adaptations. The artwork is absolutely beautiful, but for whatever reason, it doesn't really excite me.